250 less jobs.
So, George, you give us permission to start? Okay. Now, it seems like it's very hard to compete with lunch. And if that is not hard enough, once you have lunch, you come, do you really want to listen? Now, this is not going to be the case. We have a really good group of people who are going to wake you up no matter what. Let me start off by saying that I have just chaired one of the parallel sessions, and I think chairing the next plenary sessions, I know now what I am going to do when I retire. I am going to keep running around chairing sessions. So if you have a job for me, please let me know. It's a pleasure for me to chair this session. In the first plenary, the focus was much broader. It was on trying to understand what happened to issues of integration through the crisis and framing of the crisis. Consequences, how do we avoid the next one? Whether you agree with the bottom line conclusion of the lender of last resort or not, it is an issue that we all need to worry about. This plenary is quite different. It's shifting from the global to the regional. And at the table we have the issue of the EU. And the EU seems to have come up with this magic formula. Somehow it worked. The questions, or the set of questions really are, one, is that something that is uniquely European? Can it be replicated elsewhere? Where did the process come from? What were the motivations? What are the consequences for the member countries, aspiring countries, neighboring countries? How did the EU deal with such tough issues as distributional issues, for instance? Not all countries are, the diversity of countries, level of development and level per capita income, maturity and so on and so forth. How did they deal with that? Why were the richer countries among them willing partly to surrender part of their sovereignty for one, but also part of their wealth, to tell you the truth, because eventually that's what it is about. And institutionally, how come these nations individually were willing to surrender part of their sovereignty for someone in Brussels or elsewhere deciding for them what to do? Is that whole process costly at the end of the day? That is, are you really moving into an excessive state of centralization where decentralization has its virtues? So these are all questions that are intrinsic to the process of the EU evolution. However, the more interesting question is, for other countries looking at the EU with envy, they ask themselves, can we actually group along the same lines? Can we learn something from them? And what I find a bit distressful is, having had the access to the presentations that our great guys are going to tell you, is that not really. We are all Europeans, we are so unique, forget about it. Go and find yourself some lesson somewhere else. I'm trying to be provocative, by the way, because if you guys don't ask very tough questions to this crowd, I'm going to do that on your behalf. So that's really a starting point. Now, to answer these questions, we have a great panel. We have 3 speakers and 2 discussants. I asked them at the beginning, do you guys want me to read your bio? And all of them said, no, we are all well known, we don't need to be introduced. So I'll take them for their word. They are all qualified. They actually have a few things in common that I find really intriguing. One is that they are all accomplished academics. So I'm not going to say who has done what, but they are all accomplished academics. In one particular case, somebody published 200 articles and 30 books. So that takes a lot of time. The other feature they all have in common is that they have one leg in academia and one leg elsewhere, in policy advising capacity in one form or another. And that is also a very interesting perspective, because not only do you theorize, but you also bring in that other perspective. So without really getting into the details of it, I'm going to introduce the speakers as we go along, as just by saying their current affiliation, if you don't mind, in the interest of saving time. Let me tell you one more thing before we get into, before I give the floor to the first speaker. The way the session is going to be organized, we have 2 hours. We started late, and I am planning to take the time that we lost, not because of us, because of somebody else. And each speaker is going to have 20 minutes. Each of the 2 discussants is going to have 15 minutes, and I'm going to stick to the time. I'm going to write something 5 minutes before the time is over, and I'm going to flag it, and if it doesn't work that way, I'm going to run over there and show it. And then we want to have a very good set of questions from you and have a really lively panel. Now, we are going to start as listed on the agenda with Andrei Sapir. And Andrei Sapir is a professor of economics, European Center for Advanced Research in Economics and Statistics. He is also a professor at the University of Brussels in Belgium. And if you haven't heard about the Sapir report, you should read. It's an important document. Andrei, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ahmed. Thank you to GDN for the invitation. I very much want to do the presentation in the spirit that you just indicated. What are some of the lessons that one can draw from European integration? I mean, we have had a process that has started no more than 50 years ago, and it's true that you will hear through 3 presentations that Europe is quote-unquote special, sui generis, and I think there are many factors that I don't have the time to discuss that make that Europe special, and obviously much of it is to do with history and politics. But nonetheless, I think that looking at this process with an open eye does give us a number of lessons. Now, the first thing that I want you to remember is exactly what is written here, that economic integration is a process. It's not something that you start and say, you know, we are going to have a regional integration, and then 2 years from now, 5 years from now, we will be at some level. It's going to be taking time. And you have to realize that this is a process. Now, what I want to emphasize is what I believe are the keys to a successful process. And the process can take you in different places, can start in different places, can take you to different places. So clearly what you need to do, I mean, this is very basic, but I think very important, I think, what I'm going to put in this slide. You must start with a set of clear and shared objectives. Very often I've seen projects of regional integration falter because of this lack of clearly defined and clearly agreed upon shared objectives. One has to proceed step by step. But proceeding step by step also means that you have to choose, and I will discuss that in a moment, what is your initial step. You have to decide where you want to go and where you start. And where you start will also determine as to where you can go. You have to put a timetable, I think, to remove internal barriers. Many of this process can be very painful. And unless you have a clear timetable, I think it's very, very hard. You have to be mindful that as you are doing integration among a set of countries, you're also having barriers towards the external world. And you can create a very costly process of integration. Nothing worse than integrate among countries and have very high barriers towards the outside. This process will not be viable in economic terms. And you have to think that although you may be doing something in the arena of trade, you have to keep in mind that there are all kinds of shocks that can happen. And the financial crisis has been a major shock, and you have to be able to withstand with your regional process of integration those shocks. Now, there's clearly a very big issue of sequencing of economic integration. And sequencing will mean, and we will look at how it went in the European case, you'll have to decide what is your ambition in terms of integration. What is your ultimate ambition, and what is your initial step? Again, we'll see in a second, it's not trivial by any way.